Hello, guys and gals, and this is our part 7 of our reading of 1984 by George Orwell. As always, we start with the copyright information here. I believe this is a 1961 copy, actually, because it has a afterword is from 1961. But anyways, it says here, all rights reserved, including the right to reproduce this book or portions thereof in any form. And I'm taking that. Anyways, what we're going to do now is start with a disclaimer. This is an older book. It has stereotypes, it has violence, and I don't really agree with it. Anyways, so yeah, let me just see where we were. Okay. Anyways, yeah, here we are. Let's put the bookmark over there. Okay, it says here, currently the telescreen lit up. Parsons is talking about how his daughter and two other girls turned over some foreigner to the thought police. And then there's Syme is there too, studying some piece of paper or something. I don't know. Anyways. And they're talking about foodstuffs and the Ministry of Plenty. The phrase, our happy new life, recurred several times. It had been a favorite of late of the Ministry of Plenty. Parsons had his attention caught by the trumpet call, sat listening with a sort of gaping solemnity, a sort of edified. He could not follow the figures, but he was aware that they were in some way a cause for satisfaction. He had lugged out a huge and filthy pipe, which was already half full of charred tobacco. With the tobacco ration at 100 grams a week, it was seldom possible to fill a pipe up to the top. Winston was smoking a victory cigarette, which he held carefully horizontally. The new ration did not start till tomorrow, and he had only 4 cigarettes left. For the moment, he had shut his ears to the remoter noises, and was listening to the stuff that streamed out of the telescreen. It appeared that there had even been demonstrations to thank Big Brother for raising the chocolate ration to 20 grams a week. And only yesterday he reflected that it had been announced that the ration was to be reduced to 20 grams a week. Was it possible that they could swallow that after only 24 hours? Yes, they swallowed it. Parsons swallowed it easily, with the stupidity of an animal. The eyeless creature at the other table swallowed it fanatically, passionately, with a furious desire to track down, denounce, and vaporize anyone who should suggest that last week the ration had been 30 grams. Syme, too, in some more complex way, involved doublethink. Syme swallowed it. He was then alone in the possession of a memory? The fabulous statistics continue to pour out of the telescreen. As compared with last year, there was more food, more clothes, more houses, more furniture, more cooking pots, more fuel, more ships, more helicopters, more books, more babies, more of everything except disease, crime, and insanity. Year by year and minute by minute, everybody and everything was whizzing rapidly upwards. As Syme had done earlier, Winston had taken up his spoon and dabbed in the pale-colored gravy that drizzled across the table, drawing a long streak of it out into a pattern. He meditated resentfully on the physical texture of life. Had it always been like this? Had food always tasted like this? He looked around the canteen at a low-ceilinged, crowded room with walls grimy from the contact of innumerable bodies, battered metal tables and chairs placed so closely together that you sat with elbows touching, bent spoons, dented trays, coarse white mugs, all surfaces greasy, grime in every crack, and a sourish composite smells, the smell of bad gin and bad coffee, and metallic stew, and dirty clothes. Always in your stomach and in your skin, there was a sort of protest, a feeling that you had to be, that you had been cheated of something that you had a right to. It was true that he had no memories of anything greatly different in any time that he could actually remember. There had never been quite enough to eat. One had never had socks or underclothes that were not full of holes, furniture always that had always been battered and rickety, rooms underheated, tube trains crowded, houses falling to pieces, bread dark-colored, tea a rarity, coffee filthy tasting, cigarettes insufficient, nothing cheap and plentiful except synthetic gin, and though of course it grew worse as one's body aged, was it not a sign that this was not the natural order of things? If one's heart sickened at the discomfort and dirt and scarcity, the interminable winters, the stickiness of one's socks, the stickiness of one's socks, and lifts that never worked, the cold water, the gritty soap, the cigarettes that came to pieces, the food with its strange evil tastes. Why should one feel it to be intolerable unless one had some kind of ancestral memory that things had once been different? He looked around the canteen again. Nearly everyone was ugly, and would still have been ugly even if dressed otherwise than in the uniform blue overalls. On the far side of the room, sitting at a table alone, a small, curious beetle-like man was drinking a cup of coffee, his little eyes darting suspicious glances from side to side. How easy it was, thought Winston, if you did not look about you, to believe that the physical type set up by the party as an ideal, tall, muscular youths and deep-bosomed maidens, blonde-haired, vital, sunburnt, carefree, existed and even predominated. Actually, so far as he could judge, the majority of people in Airstrip 1 were small, dark, and ill-favored. It was curious how that beetle-like type proliferated in the ministries. Little dumpy men, growing stout very early in life, with short legs, swift scuttling movements, and fat, inscrutable faces with very small eyes. It was the type that seemed to flourish best under the dominion of the party. The announcement from the Ministry of Plenty ended, and another trumpet call ended on another trumpet call and gave way to tinny music. Parsons, stirred to vague enthusiasm by the bombardment of figures, took his pipe out of his mouth. The Ministry of Plenty's certainly done a good job this year, he said, with a knowing shake of his head. By the way, Smith, old boy, I suppose you haven't got any razor blades you can let me have? Not one, said Winston. I've been using the same blade for 6 weeks myself. Oh, well, just thought I'd ask you, old boy. Sorry, said Winston. The quacking voice from the next table, temporarily silenced during the ministry's announcement, had started up again, as loud as ever. For some reason, Winston suddenly found himself thinking of Mrs. Parsons, with her wispy hair and the dust in the creases of her face. Within 2 years, those children would be denouncing her to the thought police. Mrs. Parsons would be vaporized, Simon would be vaporized, Winston would be vaporized, O'Brien would be vaporized. Parsons, on the other hand, would never be vaporized. The eyeless creature with the quacking voice would never be vaporized. The little beetle-like man who scuttled so nimbly through the labyrinthine corridors of ministries, they too would never be vaporized. And the girl with dark hair, the girl from the fiction department, she would never be vaporized either. It seemed to him that he knew instinctively who would survive and who would perish, though just what it was that made for survival, it was not easy to say. At that moment, he was dragged out of his reverie by a violent jerk. The girl at the next table had turned partly around and was looking at him. It was the girl with dark hair. She was looking at him in a sidelong way, but with curious intensity. The instant that she caught his eye, she looked away again. The sweat started out on Winston's backbone. A horrible pang of terror went through him. It was gone almost at once, but it left a sort of nagging uneasiness behind. Why was she watching him? Why did she keep following him about? Unfortunately, he could not remember whether she had already been at that table when he arrived or had come there afterwards, but yesterday, at any rate, during the 2 minutes hate, she had sat immediately behind him, when there was no apparent need to do so. Quite likely her real object had been to listen to him and make sure whether he was shouting loudly enough. His earlier thoughts returned to him. Probably she was not actually a member of the thought police, but then it was precisely the amateur spy who was the greatest danger of all. He did not know how long she had been looking at him, but perhaps for as much as 5 minutes, and it was possible that his features had not been perfectly under control. It was terribly dangerous to let your thoughts wander when you were in any public place or within range of a telescreen. The smallest thing could give you away. A nervous tic, an unconscious look of anxiety, a habit of muttering to yourself, anything that carried with it the suggestion of abnormality. If you had something to hide, in any case, to wear an improper expression on your face, to look incredulous when a victory was announced, for example, was itself a punishable offense. There was even a word for it in newspeak. Face crime, it was called. The girl had turned her back on him again. Perhaps, after all, she was not really following him about. Perhaps it was coincidence that she had sat so close to him 2 days running. His cigarette had gone out, and he laid it carefully on the edge of the table. He would finish smoking it after work, if he could keep the tobacco in it. Quite likely, the person at the next table was a spy of the thought police, and quite likely he would be in the cellars of the Ministry of Love within 3 days, but a cigarette must not be wasted. Syme had folded up his strip of paper and stowed it away in his pocket. Parsons had begun talking again. "Did I ever tell you, old boy," he said, chuckling round the stem of his pipe, "about the time that those 2 nippers of mine set fire to the old market woman's skirt because they saw her wrapping up sausages in a poster of BB, Big Brother, sneaking up behind her and set fire to it with a box of matches. Burned her quite badly, I believe. Little beggars, eh? But keen as mustard. That's the first-rate training they give them in the spies nowadays. Better than in my day, even. Better than my day, even. What do you think the latest thing they've served them out with? Ear trumpets for listening through keyholes. My little girl brought one home the other night, tried it out on our sitting room door, and reckoned she could hear twice as much as with her ear to the hole. Of course, it's only a toy, mind you. Still, gives them the right idea, eh?" At this moment, the telescreen let out a piercing whistle. It was the signal to return to work. All 3 men sprang to their feet to join the struggle round the lifts, and the remaining tobacco fell out of Winston's cigarette. We are to Chapter 6 now. Chapter 6. Winston was writing in his diary. It was 3 years ago. It was on a dark evening in a narrow side street near one of the big railway stations. She was standing near a doorway in the wall under a street lamp that hardly gave any light. She had a young face painted very thick. It was really the paint that appealed to me, the whiteness of it, like a mask, and the bright red lips. Party women never paint their faces. There was nobody else in the street and no telescreen. She said $2. For a moment, it was too difficult to go on. He shut his eyes and pressed his finger against them, trying to squeeze out the vision that kept recurring. He had an almost overwhelming temptation to shout a string of filthy words at the top of his voice, or to bang his head against the wall, to kick over the table and hurl the ink pot through the window, to do any violent or noisy or painful thing that might black out the memory that was tormenting him. 56. Okay. Your worst enemy, he reflected, was your own nervous system. At any moment, the tension inside you was liable to translate itself into some visible symptom. He thought of a man whom he had passed on the street a few weeks back, a quite ordinary-looking man, a party member, aged 35 or 40, tallish and thin, carrying a briefcase. They were a few meters apart when the left side of the man's face was suddenly contorted by a sort of spasm. It happened again just as they were passing each other. It was only a twitch, a quiver, rapid as the clicking of a camera shutter, but obviously habitual. He remembered thinking at the time that the poor devil is done for, and what was frightening was that the action was quite possibly unconscious. The most deadly danger of all was talking in your sleep. There was no way of guarding against that so far as he could see. He drew his breath and went on writing. I went with her through the doorway and across a backyard into a basement kitchen. There was a bed against the wall and a lamp on the table turned down very low. His teeth were set on edge. He would have liked to spit simultaneously. He would have liked to spit simultaneously with the woman in the basement kitchen. He thought of Catherine, his wife. Winston was married, had been married, at any rate. Probably he still was married. For so far as he knew, his wife was not dead. He seemed to breathe again the warm, stuffy odors of the basement kitchen, an odor compound of bugs and dirty clothes, and villainous cheap scent, but nevertheless alluring, because no woman of the party ever used scent, or could be imagined of doing so. Only the proles used scent. In his mind, the smell of it was intoxicatingly mixed up with fornication. When he had gone with that woman, it had been his first lapse in 2 years or thereabouts. Consorting with prostitutes was forbidden, of course, but it was one of those rules that you could occasionally nerve yourself to break. It was dangerous, but it was not a life or death matter. To be caught with a prostitute might mean 5 years in a forced labor camp, not more if you had committed no other offense, and it was easy enough, provided that you could avoid being caught in the act. The poorer quarters swarmed with women who were ready to sell themselves. Some could even be purchased for a bottle of gin, which the proles were not supposed to drink. Tacitly, the party was even inclined to encourage prostitution as an outlet for instincts which could not be altogether suppressed. Mere debauchery did not matter as much so long as it was furtive and joyless, and only involved the women of a submerged, and despised class. The unforgivable crime was promiscuity between party members, but though this was one of the crimes that the accused in the great purges invariably confessed to, it was difficult to imagine any such thing actually happening. The aim of the party was not merely to prevent men and women from forming loyalties which it might not be able to control. Its real undeclared purpose was to remove all pleasure from the sexual act. Not love so much as eroticism was the enemy, inside marriage as well as outside it. All marriages between party members had to be approved by a committee appointed for the purpose, and though the principle was never clearly stated, permission was always refused if the couple concerned gave the impression of being physically attracted to one another. The only recognized purpose of marriage was to beget children for the service of the party. Sexual intercourse was to be looked on as a slightly disgusting minor operation, like having an enema. This again was never put into plain words, but it was in an indirect way. It was rubbed in every party member from childhood onward. There were even organizations such as the Junior Anti-Sex League, which advocated complete celibacy for both sexes. All children were to be begotten by artificial insemination. Artsem, it was called in Newspeak, and thought up in a public institution. This, Winston was aware, was not meant altogether seriously, but somehow it fitted in with the general ideology of the party. The party was trying to kill the sex instinct, or if it could not be killed, then so distort it and dirty it. He did not know why this was so, but it seemed natural that it should be so, and so far as the women were concerned, the party's efforts were largely successful. He thought again of Catherine. It must have been 9, 10, nearly 11 years since they had parted. It was curious how seldom he thought of her. For days at a time, he was capable of forgetting that he had ever been married. They had only been together for about 15 months. The party did not permit divorce, but it rather encouraged separation in cases where there were no children. Wait, make sure this is the right page. Catherine was a tall, fair-haired girl, very straight. Wait a minute. Okay, yeah, this is the right page. Sorry. Catherine was a tall, fair-haired girl, very straight, with splendid movements. She had a bold, aquiline face, a face that one might have called noble, until one discovered that there was, as nearly as possible, nothing behind it. Very early in their marriage life he had decided, though perhaps it was only that he knew her more intimately than he knew most people, that she had, without exception, the most stupid, vulgar, empty mind that he had ever encountered. She had not a thought in her head that was not a slogan, and there was no imbecility, absolutely none. Imbecility? That she was not capable of swallowing, if the party handed it out to her. This human soundtrack he nicknamed her in his own mind, yet he could have endured living with her if it had not been for one thing: sex. It seemed as soon as he touched her, she seemed to wince and stiffen. To embrace her was like embracing a jointed wooden image, and that was strange. And what was strange was that even when she was clasping him against her, he had the feeling that she was simultaneously pushing him away with all her strength. The rigidity of her muscles managed to convey that impression. She would lie there with her shut eyes, neither resisting nor cooperating, but submitting. It was extraordinarily embarrassing and after a while horrible. But even then, he could not have borne living with her if it had been agreed that they should remain celibate. Oh, wait a minute. But even then, he could have borne living with her if they had been agreed that they both remain celibate. But curiously enough, it was Catherine who refused this. They must, she said, produce a child if they could. So the performance continued to happen once a week, quite regularly, whenever it was not impossible. She used even to remind him of it in the morning and as something which had to be done that evening and which must not be forgotten. She had two names for it. One was making a baby, and the other was our duty to the party. Yes, she had actually used that phrase. Quite soon, he grew to have a feeling of positive dread when the appointed day came around, but luckily no children appeared, and in the end she agreed to give up trying, and soon afterwards they parted. Winston sighed inaudibly and picked up the pen again and wrote. She threw herself down on the bed and at once, without any kind of preliminary, it was most coarse, horrible way you could imagine, pulled up her skirt. Okay, and we're going to stop here because we are running low on time. We made it to 58, page 58. Bottom of page 58. We've been reading from, let me see here, George Orwell's 1984. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you'll support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching and have a great day.